gonna make some wraps. My thread going back towards the bend of the hook. Snip out my thread. So I like the fluorescent orange thread because first time I went to Alaska, one of the guides I was with, he told me about the hot spot on a mouse. I was super interested in fishing mice, and some reason orange just attracts trout and big trout. So mess around fishing it. I definitely think there is something too about having some orange on a fly pattern or a mouse fly pattern. So sometimes I'll do it too when I'm just tying a non-articulated one. I'll put a little patch of orange dubbing kind of after I tie in my tail, and that acts as that little hot spot. So with this fly, there's going to be some hot spot where you'll only see on like the underbelly of the fly and kind of the head of the fly. But I think the orange, definitely there's something to it when it comes to hunting for trout. So I'll build up a nice little base of thread there. So I'm going to take my Power Pro and my Gamakatsu octopus hook, and I want this hook to be riding upright, so I'm going to tie it in as such. So I'm just going to thread it through there, and then I'm going to bring the other side back through the eye again. And that gives me a little loop, so I'll have 2 tag ends in the loop, and I'm just going to drop that hook through my loop and pull my 2 tag ends, capture it as such. So when I fix it on there, I want to try and make sure that I get both those pieces lined up next to each other and they're on top, and then I can kind of adjust where I want that stinger hook. I'll make a couple loose wraps to start, kind of adjust it out. And I might pull it in a little bit more because I want this hook to be like sneaking through the tail. So we'll actually punch it through the pine squirrel strip as my tail, so it really stays upright, especially when it's moving in the water. And if you just get those like little nipping takes, you'll hook up instead of just having this one big hook up front. That lined up in there. So for a little extra security, just like I would on a Dalai Lama, I take my Power Pro and go through the eye, and I'll make some thread wraps, kind of pulling it tight so there's no extra bulk and it's staying tight to the shank. Work it up just to right behind the eye, and then I'll pull it back and I'll make some more tight wraps, and I'll go about halfway down the shank and then I'll actually trim it out. Trim out my tags, make some spins to fly down my thread, especially with the thicker UTC stuff, it braids up real quick, so constantly spinning it just to make sure I get those flat thread wraps, especially when I start using the foam. It really makes a difference. So secure all that in there, and I like to throw a bunch of thread wraps on all my flies. I mean, thread's not all that expensive, and it just cleans up the body, makes it easier surface to work on. So before I keep going, I'll hit all my thread wraps with a little bit of super glue, and that just makes sure nothing happens. A little bit of super glue goes a long way. And I'll just cover them up one more time. Alright, so now I'll take my pine squirrel, and when I'm selecting my pine squirrel, you know, some of the strips on it are like super thin. I want some with a little bit of bulk so that when I do punch this through, it doesn't just, you know, break off. You can also use a piece of rabbit strip and trim it up a little bit if you don't have pine squirrel. But the pine squirrel just kind of makes the tail look a little more natural because it is a little bit thinner tail. So I'll leave a little tuft of my pine squirrel strip at the end because when it gets wet it really, you know, slims down. You can kind of see it when I wet it. So I'll take that and I'm just gonna rip out fibers or the hair going up the base of the hide. You can take scissors and trim them up. I just like to rip them up so it's nice and clean. I think it also kind of makes it look like, you know, if you've seen a mouse's tail, it's not necessarily just like skin. It's got a little bit of texture to it. So I'll clear probably 3-4 inches or so, you know, just enough so that there's probably an inch of the tail off the back still there. So once I got that kind of prepped and cleaned up, trim out where I stopped, and now I got a kind of a bare piece of rabbit or a pine squirrel. So go ahead and tie that in there. Try and get it so it's right on top of the shank. So yeah, that's about right because it'll be sitting through there like that. We'll make some securing wraps. You know, the 210 you can really crank down. I've tied it with some 140, and the 210 just makes it a little bit easier to crank down harder on, you know, the foam. Make sure you get a nice pull on the foam. So now I'm going to kind of measure where it's going to sit at the like almost straight part of the shank. So I'll take that, kind of pick my spot out, and then I'm going to punch the hook right down the middle. So I puncture the hide, slide it down. Now that'll be sitting just like that. So it covers it up a little bit, and you know, it ensures that it stays upright instead of kind of dangling around like a normal intruder style fly. So, clean up my wraps. Now I've got a piece of my 6mm foam, and when I take my foam, I got about an inch wide, so that's kind of going to be the top of my fly, and then I trim out about a 1/2 inch triangle, just so that I can tie it, you know, a little bit easier on. If I try to just tie like that onto the shank, you know, it wouldn't. I'd have to do it the entire body and it just gets too bulky, so, you know, limiting how much you have to take of the foam kind of helps. Take my foam, hold it in there, grab it, get some tight wraps. So I like to wrap it and then kind of like add tension, wrap it, add tension. I kind of see the underside, and like I said, I want to like accent some of these spots with that orange thread, and that's why I'm tying with it. So right on the butt section, like if I was going to tie in my dubbing, of orange. I would usually have it be right there for my little hot butt. And then make sure it stays on top. And I can start cranking down a little bit more, grabbing some more of the foam. You see the wrap start to loosen up as I pull it, so I'm just gonna do a nice job covering all those up and capture them, make sure it doesn't spin on me. So I got my foam in there, so when I pull it over, you know, you're gonna have a nice rounded spot that you pull over. Now I've already prepared, you know, the ones that I'm going to use for this fly, but all I did was take my carded chenille and took 3 pieces, and they're about 4 inches long, 5 inches long. You can tie a bunch of them with just long strips, and then kind of cut it where you want, but all I did was do basic overhand knot and captured all 3 of them together. So especially when I trim them up at the end, you know, it's like I got little feet, and then these stay together when they're tied in, and it makes my little legs on my fly. So take my first one and make a couple loose wraps. I tie them in kind of at like a 45, so they're kind of pointing down. And measure them up a little bit. Want them just a little bit longer than the rabbit's going to be sticking out of there. Tie in one side first, snip out. So like I can limit my waist, tie them a little shorter, but it is harder to tie the overhand knot when you're working with the shorter pieces of the chenille. Take my far side and measure it out and capture it. Some loose wraps, like I said, like a 45 pointing down. Kind of measure them up, make sure they're both on the same length on each side. And there's my 2 little legs. My back legs. Trim out the excess. So now I got my legs tied in there, I got my tail. So when I fold this over, it'll look, you know, really nice with all the rabbit. So with my rabbit strip, just want to kind of make sure that I know which way the fibers are going. So I want to kind of tie it in at the tip instead of tying it in maybe like you would, you know, on a different, like on the bald eagle I tied, for example, you know, I tied it in there and then I make my wrap. So I kind of want to have that same going forward. So I'm going to start clean on the front side and usually cut out a little bit of a triangle, make sure it sits in there nice, easier to tie in. Take my triangle, tie that in back to the foam, and some securing wraps, and stop just right behind the eye. So I like to throw a little wood finish in, you know, save my work. It's quick and easy. Also makes it easy to use my rotary feature. So now I'm just gonna palmer my rabbit. So go, wraps going this way. Kind of tease back those hairs as I go forward. you see, I'm covering up a lot of the orange that, you know, is the base of the thread. Just want some tiny spots of orange. No mice have orange on them. So once I think that's good on my wraps. So especially working with like rabbit and hide and stuff, you got to give yourself a little bit of space so you don't add up too much bulk by the head and you can't finish your fly and whip finish. So I'm gonna pull that tight, do 2 or 3 behind, and then I'll pull everything back. I'll make some wraps in front. Trim out my piece of rabbit. Wet my fingers and kind of comb everything back. I'm sure that alone might catch fish. You know, it's looking pretty good already. So moving forward, I'm gonna part the hair evenly on top of the fly. Said wetting your fingers really helps do this. It's even, so you just got even amount coming out from each side of the foam. See, I got a nice flat surface on top. Now I'll fold over my foam. Kind of make sure my hair is pulled back. Make sure my thread is pulled back away from the eye. Then get a good bite on the foam. Try and make sure it's even. So I'll do 2 loose wraps, and then I'll really pull it down and I'll try and keep it straight on top. Same thing, like 2 loose wraps, and keep cranking down with my thread as I'm going through here. And then I'm going to throw some super glue on my thread. So you got 2 choices. You can whip finish right here on top of that super glue, or you can leave this long and fold it back and then whip finish down here. I'll do it both ways. You know, we secured it with the super glue. I'm going to bring it up in front of the eye though, and then hold it back and do a whip finish. And now trim this front piece of foam off. I've tried to just do it all in one piece, but the foam is so stiff, it just doesn't have the same like movement in the water. So take your long pair of scissors. I got a pair of these Loon 5-inch scissors, razor scissors. So I'll leave, you know, 1/4 of an inch, and I'll just trim a straight line, kind of like a standard cut on a mouse fly or on the Moorish mouse or whatnot. So just to make sure everything stays how I want it, I'm going to take some UV finish and coat my thread wraps here and then hit them with the UV light. On the back portion of the fly, I'm not as concerned with crowding the eye of the hook. I can get away with it. You know, I'm not as worried about it because I'm not threading a line through it to, you know, fish it. So this is more, you know, just being careful on the front side. So I'll hit that with the UV. but you can really see the fluorescence when I hit it with the UV light. So there's the back half of my mouse. You know, he's got his two little legs, his tail, little hot spot you can kind of see. You know, I don't know if a fish will see that, but the orange butt. And throw that off to the side. And now we're gonna start on the front half. So I'm gonna start just like I did before. Some thread wraps just behind the eye, work my way down the shank, trim out my thread. Spin it and flatten that thread down so it really coats the whole fly. See it start braiding up there. Some more spins. Just really coats it nicely when you do those counterclockwise spins of your bobbin. So I just throw a little bit of a base down. I feel like the intruder wire won't slide around as much, especially if I do have like a little bit of a base of thread down. So I'll take my, 4 or 5 inch piece of intruder wire and measure that up, lay some thread wraps down, and I'll go just till it starts bending down and work my way back up, still making sure that this stays right on top of the shank. I kind of like to leave it close to like my side that I'm tying on, and then when I thread it over, it kind of like lays down next to it. And same thing, I want to leave myself some space here so that when I do, add the foam in there and finishing the fly, I'm not crowding the eye of the actual spot where I'm going to be threading my line through to fish it. Got my first piece of wire down. Now I can take my back piece of my fly and I'll thread up through the eye. Pull it through there. I like to start about halfway with my thread. It makes it easier to judge and adjust. I'll put some loose wraps down and then kind of measure my loop. And I want them pretty much kissing. I want it to have articulation, but I want them pretty close together. A real mouse isn't split in half. Make some loose wraps right down next to it. Start tightening it up a little bit, and I'll trim out this front piece, my wire. Then we'll hit it with some super glue again, make sure that nothing goes anywhere. A fish taking a fly like this is going to be not small. It's not a little. You want to catch a little fish, this is not the fly. Got a good base of thread down. Take my super glue, throw another touch on there, and make some more wraps just to pull everything together. So Let that dry for a sec. I just took my trailer hook and secured it to my vise with a couple of wraps, bend it and mold it just to keep that top or that back fly kind of even with it, so I can measure and then make sure I don't hook myself, as I've done in previous videos. So I got another piece of foam measured out, same thing, got a nice little cut in there. So trim it up a little bit more. Just make 2 little cuts on the side so that thread lays in there, kind of right up against the fat part. So kind of measure that. Some loose wraps all the way to my tie-in spot. Kind of give it a look. Creep it back a little bit further. As you bite into the foam, those other wraps kind of get taken by the wayside. So same thing, keeping it on top, leaving a little bit more than I wanted, so I'll go back and try to grab a little more. Might have to trim out a little bit. My foam to allow me to do that. Just keep making wraps behind each other. Fairly tight, snug wraps. Just inching that foam back a little bit more. Just so there's not much of a gap in between these two pieces here. That was pretty close. Could maybe get a little bit closer, but I think I'd have to take out the foam and redo it. So that'll work. Can always press it back a little more when I make my fold. A bunch of wraps, try and kill the bulk of that foam on there. The 6mm stuff super thick. So now I'll take my front legs. I'm going to actually do my rabbit first. So I'll take my piece of rabbit and I'll tie that in back here. So I'll work my thread back, grab a piece of it, and bring my thread up to just about halfway on the shank. So I'll get my rabbit strip kind of hanging off the back there. Make sure all those fibers are pulled back. So now I'll take my other piece of legs that I got pre-made here, and I'll tie those in at a 45. Front legs a little bit shorter than the back legs. Grab those. Same thing, like a 45 degree. They're kind of hanging down. Trim out my chenille. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side. Measure those out. A couple loose wraps to start it. And I'll kind of position my legs, make sure they're all even. I can bite into them a little bit more. Snip them out. So work my thread back up to just behind the eye, leaving myself a little bit of room. And now I'll kind of try and bend these forward. So they're down, which is good. Bend them forward a little bit so that when I palmer my rabbit, I can smooth them in there. Make sure you don't capture the legs sooner than you want. You know, get like 3-4 wraps of the rabbit in there first. Make sure you're not trapping too many fibers. And then I'll go wrap behind and capture it. And some wraps in front. And I'll snip it out and cover it up a little bit more, secure it in there. So here's another little hot spot. You'll see a little bit of orange in there. So just like I did before, I'm going to part my rabbit on top, try to make it even. Then when I pull that foam over, nice even coat on each side. You know, some other great color schemes, gray foam with kind of a grizzly rabbit. Like to use brown too. The like tan cream color is great with kind of a cream top, or the brown. I just think the black and the brown look really good. It's a nice silhouette. I mean, that's what I'm going for. I like to fish it like dusky, kind of nighttime pattern. So I'll take my strip of foam now, kind of measure it, press it back a little bit, give it a little bit of a hump here, as you can see. Then I'll grab a piece, make 2 wraps, make sure those wraps are where I want them, and I'll cinch them down together, cinch them down, cinch it down, down. So there we go. So front piece of foam's a little bit bigger than the back piece, which is what we're going for. You know, a little bit of a taper to the mouse or the fly. So once I got a couple good ones, really crank it down. The underside looks pretty good. I'm not crowding the eye, leaving myself enough room to whip finish. Rabbit's pretty even on each side. Now I'm going to fold my foam back over and make a little bit of a head. And this is where you're going to kind of measure it up to where you want. You want this to be the most buoyant part so that the front, you know, of the fly stays up when you're fishing it. So about 3/4 of an inch or so, leaving yourself enough room for those eyes to go on there. So I'll take a loose grab, and cinch it down again, putting a little more tension with each wrap. So now you see I got a big old fat head on there, and I'm going to cinch it down a little bit more. We'll add some super glue on there just to make sure all those thread wraps day. I don't know if you fish too many mouse patterns or, you know, big foam flies. Trout have teeth and they do tear up foam, so you use thicker foam and stuff like that, it lasts a little bit longer, a little more buoyant. Make some real tight wraps. And I want to make sure that you can kind of see that orange in there for the accent with the thread. Take my super glue, get a good coating on my thread. I'll do that on the collar. And then it's pretty stiff now, but we'll whip finish right underneath there. So this part can be a little challenging. Get your whip finish out. Pull that foam back. Get one in there. 2, 3. Make sure I'm not crowding the eye. Pull that one tight. And I'll get one more whip finish in there just for safekeeping. So that's all done. Snip out my thread. So now I'll flip the fly over, you know, wet that rabbit again and pull it back, and I'm going to coat my thread wraps again with the UV. Just clean it up. And I'll take my torch and I'll hit my thread wraps, harden it up. This top piece of foam is going to be my ears, so I'm going to cut it, you know, leave myself some space, just cut a straight line, and then flip it towards me, and I'll cut a straight line. Make sure we don't get the thread wraps. And I'll split those two pieces so now you can see I got some ears. And it looks pretty mousy. So almost done. You know, you can fish it as is. The eyes though, I think kind of make the fly. So got my glow in the dark eyes here, and we're gonna put one on each side, and they are glow in the dark, so I carry my UV pen with me, especially when I'm fishing them at night, and hit them kind of every cast or every other cast just for a second, and it really makes them glow. We'll flick off the lights here kind of after we get them on there, and you can really see how much the UV makes them glow. And it's also easier to kind of see and track your pattern, especially when you're fishing it at night. So what we're going to do is just kind of make sure I got a good surface of foam to work with on each side, and take some super glue, add a nice little blop on the foam. And the eyes are somewhat adhesive. Definitely got to use glue or something to stick them on there. So stick one side on, kind of press it down, and there's one side. And then try to show you a little better on this side. Take some super glue, just a small little patch. So fly's almost done. Said that a couple times already. You know I like to tie big flies, to take a while to tie. So trim out my legs or my toes a little bit so they look a little more realistic. And then we'll trim out the hook, and then we'll kill those lights so you can really see the eyes glow in the dark. Take my piece of wire off holding this trailer hook, and there it is. Still got to trim out this hook, but it's got a pretty good profile on it. Articulated, moves real well. You know, it makes it a little bit easier to cast just with a little more bulk. So watch your eyes. You're trimming out the hook here like that. There we go. Trimmed out the back one, left the front one, and then we got the trailer hook. So long fly like this, you know, you're gonna get an aggressive eat, but you also don't want to lose a big fish because didn't have enough hooks. So there he is, the big-eyed Stuart Little, tied and designed by myself. So we'll flick the lights off for a sec. So I'll hit it with some UV light, get them going. So I like to carry the torch out there with me. I mean, you can see it with just a second of light, it really lights them up. You know, it's easier to fish, especially in the dark when you got a little bit something that you can follow. So you can see if you're fishing at night, super handy to have those glow in the dark eyes. But you gotta have the UV torch to keep it going. And you can see the orange really accents nicely. The fluorescence. So glowing.